Welcome to the world of Japanese literature. Title: Lemon. Author Kajii Motojirō. An indescribable, ominous weight pressed constantly upon my heart. Should I call it irritation, or disgust? Just as one suffers a hangover after drinking, so too does a kind of continual hangover come to those who drink every day. That time had come for me. And it was rather bad. It was not pulmonary catarrh or nervous exhaustion that was the trouble, nor the searing burden of debt. The real trouble was that sinister weight. No beautiful music that had once delighted me, no exquisite verse of poetry, could I bear any longer. Even when I went out of my way to listen to a phonograph, after only 2 or 3 bars I would suddenly feel compelled to stand up and leave. Something made it impossible for me to stay still. And so I wandered ceaselessly, drifting from town to town. I remember that, for some reason, at that time I was deeply drawn to things that were shabby yet beautiful. Even in scenery, I preferred a city half in ruins, not its formal main streets, but its back alleys, which felt somehow more familiar, where dirty laundry hung drying, where junk lay scattered about, and where one could glimpse untidy rooms through half-open doors. I loved streets that seemed fated to crumble, weathered by rain and wind until they would one day return to the earth with collapsing mud walls, tilting rows of houses, and only the plants thriving wildly, with, at times, a startling sunflower or a canna in bloom. At times, as I walked along such streets, I would try to convince myself that I was not in Kyoto, but in some distant city hundreds of miles away, Sendai, perhaps, or Nagasaki, that I had somehow come to such a place. I longed to escape from Kyoto, to go to a city where no one knew me. What I sought above all was tranquility, a deserted room in a lonely inn, a clean futon, a fragrant mosquito net, a crisply starched yukata. I wanted nothing more than to lie there for a month, thinking of nothing. If only, before I knew it, this very place might somehow become that faraway city. When the illusion began to take hold, I painted layer upon layer of imagined color over it. It was nothing more than a double exposure my illusion overlaid upon the crumbling town. And within that overlap, I found a strange pleasure in losing sight of my real self. I had also grown fond of those things called fireworks. Not just the fireworks themselves, but the bundles of them wrapped in cheap, vivid paper, striped in red, purple, yellow, and blue, with names like the Stars of Nakayama Temple, the Battle of Flowers, and withered pampas grass. There were even little spinning ones called mouse fireworks, each coiled into a circle and packed neatly in a box. Somehow, those things stirred my heart in a strange, delicate way. Then there were glass ohajiki, small, translucent game pieces embossed with fish or flowers, and the tiny glass marbles we called nankin dama. I loved them too. Sometimes I would even put one in my mouth, savoring the faint, cool taste of glass, a subtle pleasure I can hardly describe. Was it perhaps the sweet memory of childhood that returned to me of the times I used to do the same thing and be scolded by my parents? That faint, refreshing flavor seemed to carry with it something poetic, something pure. As you may have guessed, I had almost no money. And yet, to comfort myself when my heart stirred even slightly at the sight of such trifles, I needed some form of indulgence. Something that cost only 2 or 3 mere pennies yet felt luxurious. Something beautiful yet humble enough to appeal to my weary sensibilities. Such small things were, quite naturally, what consoled me. In earlier days, before life had begun to erode me, one of my favorite places had been the Maruzen store. There, I would lose myself among bottles of bright red and yellow hair tonics, eau de quinine, eau de cologne, or among elegant cut glass ornaments and perfume flasks of amber and jade, etched with graceful rococo patterns. Pipes, penknives, soap, cigarettes — I could spend an hour just gazing at them. And in the end, I would indulge myself only enough to buy the finest pencil they had. But even Maruzen had, by then, become an oppressive place for me. The books, the students, the cashier's counter — all of them seemed like the ghosts of my creditors, haunting me wherever I looked. One morning at that time, I was living a drifting life. Moving from one friend's boarding house to another, I found myself left alone in the hollow air that lingered after my friend had gone off to school. I was once again compelled to wander out into the streets. Something within me was driving me onward. From one town to the next I went, walking through the back alleys I mentioned before, stopping in front of candy shops, gazing at the dried shrimp, cod, and yuba dried bean curd displayed at the grocer's, until at last I came down Teramachi Street toward Nijo and stopped before a fruit shop. Allow me to describe that fruit shop for a moment, for it was, of all the shops I knew, the one I loved most. It was by no means a grand establishment, yet it expressed, more vividly than any other, the peculiar beauty that only a fruit shop can possess. The fruits were arranged upon steeply slanted shelves — I believe the boards were old, black lacquered wood — and it seemed as though a brilliant allegro of music, suddenly turned to stone by the Gorgon's face, had hardened into those colors and forms. The deeper inside the shop one looked, the higher the piles of produce rose. The beauty of the carrot leaves there was truly marvelous, as were the water-soaked beans and arrowheads kawaii glistening in their basins. What made that shop especially beautiful was its appearance at night. Teramachi Street was, by nature, a lively thoroughfare, though its atmosphere was far more serene and refined than the bustling streets of Tokyo or Osaka. The lights from the shop windows streamed out abundantly into the roadway. Yet, for some reason, the area around that particular fruit shop alone was strangely dark. It stood on a corner that joined the dimly lit Nijo Street, so the darkness on one side was only natural. But what puzzled me was that even the neighboring house facing bright Teramachi was shrouded in shadow. Still, I think it was precisely because of that darkness that the shop held such a peculiar power to enchant me. There was another reason too: its overhanging eave. The eave jutted out like the deep brim of a hat pulled low over one's eyes, so much so that it made one think, "That shop has an oddly low brim." And because of that, the space above the eave was completely dark as well. Surrounded by such darkness, the brilliance of the several light bulbs illuminating the front of the store shone forth like a sudden shower of radiance, undimmed by anything around it. It was a sight of unrestrained beauty. Standing there on the street, with the bare bulbs stabbing spirals of light straight into my eyes, or gazing through the glass window of the locksmith's second floor nearby, I found nothing in all of Teramachi that delighted me more than that view of the fruit shop. That day, I bought something from the shop, something I rarely did. For there, among the usual fruits, I found something unusual: lemons. Of course, lemons themselves are nothing rare. But since this shop, though not shabby, was still just an ordinary greengrocer's, I had scarcely ever seen them there before. In any case, I have always loved lemons. Their color, like lemon yellow paint squeezed straight from the tube and left to harden into that pure, simple hue. Their shape short and slightly spindle-like. In the end, I decided to buy just one. Where did I walk after that, and how far? I must have wandered through the streets for a long time. The ominous weight that had always pressed upon my heart seemed to have loosened, just a little, from the moment I held that lemon in my hand. I felt an extraordinary happiness beneath the sky of the city. That such stubborn melancholy could be soothed by something as small as a single fruit, it seemed impossible, and yet, paradoxically, it was true. How mysterious the heart is! The coolness of the lemon was indescribably pleasant. I had been suffering from the beginnings of lung trouble, and fever often burned in my body. In fact, I would sometimes jokingly clasp hands with my friends to show them how hot my palms were. Perhaps it was because of that heat that the chill of the fruit, seeping from my palm deep into my body, felt so exquisitely refreshing. Again and again, I lifted the fruit to my nose and inhaled its scent. California, where the lemons were said to come from, rose vividly in my imagination. And from an old Chinese text I had studied, the words of the orange seller, the phrase "its fragrance strikes the nose" kept coming to mind. When I drew in a deep breath of that fragrant air, warmth rushed through my face and body, as though my very blood had awakened. It amazed me that such simple sensations of coolness, touch, scent, sight could fit me so perfectly, as if this was what I had been seeking all along. Such was the time in my life. I strode along the street, buoyed by a light, almost proud excitement, imagining poets who had once walked in aesthetic attire through the city. I placed the lemon on a dirty hand towel or against my coat, measuring the play of color and reflection, and then I thought, where had I wandered? I found myself, at last, standing before Maruzen. That Maruzen which I had so often avoided now seemed, for some reason, easy to enter. "Today, I think I'll go in," I told myself. And with that, I strode boldly through the doors. But what was this? The happiness that had filled my heart began to slip away. My feelings no longer reached out toward the perfume bottles or the pipe cases. A dull melancholy started to gather around me. Perhaps it was simply the fatigue of having wandered for so long, I thought. I walked over to the shelves of art books. Even the act of pulling out one of those heavy volumes seemed to require more strength than usual. I took out one book after another, opened them, glanced through the pages, yet the will to examine them carefully simply would not come. And cursed as it was, I would reach for another volume. It was the same story every time. Still, I could not stop myself. I had to leaf through a few pages, scatter them apart, then set them down again, unable even to return them to their original place. I repeated this over and over. In the end, even the heavy orange-covered volume of Ingres, a book I had always loved, became unbearable, and I set it aside as well. What a cursed thing this was! My hands ached with fatigue, and I stood there, staring gloomily at the pile of books I had pulled out and stacked before me. What had happened to those art books that once so fascinated me? Once, I had loved the strange, dissonant feeling that came after gazing at each page when I would lift my eyes and find myself surrounded by the ordinary world again. Ah, yes, that's it. At that moment I remembered the lemon in my sleeve. What if I placed this lemon on top of the chaotic pile of colors just to see? Yes, that's it. A light, buoyant excitement returned to me. I began stacking the books at random, then hurriedly crushing them down, then building them up again. I added new ones, removed others. The fantastical little tower that rose before me glowed now red, now blue, as if in some strange dream. At last, it was complete. Holding back the quickened beating of my heart, I carefully, almost fearfully, placed the lemon atop the tower's highest wall. It was perfect. As I looked around, I saw that the color of the lemon had quietly absorbed the clamor of hues from the stacked books, drawing them into its slender, spindle-shaped body until it shone out, clear and sharp as a ringing bell. It seemed to me that even the dusty air inside Maruzen had become strangely taut and vibrant around that single lemon. I stood there for a while, gazing at it. Then, suddenly, a second idea struck me so strange and mischievous that it startled even me. Leaving it just as it was, I put on an innocent face and walked out. A strange, ticklish feeling came over me. Shall I go? Yes, let's go. And with that, I strode briskly out of the store. That odd, tingling feeling made me smile as I walked through the streets. I imagined myself as a curious sort of villain, the one who had planted a gleaming, golden bomb upon Maruzen's shelves. How delightful it would be, I thought, If 10 minutes from now the entire store were to explode, the blast centered right on the art section. I pursued the fantasy eagerly. In that case, I thought, that gloomy Maruzen would be blown to bits. And so I walked down Kyogoku, where the billboards for the moving pictures colored the street with their strange, gaudy charm.